Hey there, boys. Today we're going to be just looking at some random things that sort of make us better at the game and just help people to stop dying because it's pretty common and there's a lot of things that people just don't know that they should be doing that they definitely should be doing. So let's get into it. And first and foremost, the most obvious thing and the simplest thing that somebody can do is to just have a good build and or weapon choice. The sandbox of Destiny is really heavily polarized, where there are things that are just completely terrible and other things that are just absolutely insane. And there are a couple of options that are in the middle as well, but for the most part, things are either just really bad or really good, and there's not a ton in between. And while you definitely don't need the super endgame meta builds to survive in everything, having a semblance of a good build is still very helpful for staying alive in any sort of activity. This isn't a build video, so I don't want to go into any specific builds, but I think a lot of us already know what the meta builds are, stuff like the Strand Titan and the Sunbracer Warlock and such. And while even if you don't go all in on making one of these meta setups, if you have something that even resembles it or takes some elements from them, you'll see a lot more success than using some goofy stuff like Void Warlock or something. However, on the topic of having builds, you need to make sure that your build is appropriate for the teams that you're on as well. For example, if you're in a 6-player activity like a raid, using something like Empyrean chaining is going to be a little bit difficult to maintain because your teammates are going to be taking a ton of the kills. Afterwards, I want to talk about some of the weapon choice and just some general choices on what you should be going for. For example, in Destiny, right now, offense is the best defense in a lot of cases. If you just blow up all the enemies instantaneously, they can't hurt you. And the methods to doing this vary from activity to activity. In the easier content, you can just use stuff like Sunbracers and Trinity Ghoul and Sunshot. As you get into harder activities, you might use something like Triple Xeno Warlocks with rocket launchers to clear ads, so that you can clear GM ads very quickly. But for the most part, you can kill enemies before they really pose any sort of a threat in almost every activity in the game, and that should be your objective for the most part. And this is really why I talk a lot of shit about most of the legendary primaries in the game, because they aren't good at rapidly destroying ads like most special weapons for ad clear are, or some of the exotics like obviously Trinity Ghoul and Sunshot. That's why in my gameplay, you almost never see me using a legendary primary other than the Parabellum, which I use for shoot to loot, but I use that for utility purposes, not because I think it's good for ad clear. So if you are a player who just uses a primary a lot, I highly recommend trying to get off of that because primaries are very weak right now, and it's not hard to maintain special ammo. And on the third topic, we're actually going to be expanding on the topic of using primary ammo when we shouldn't be. This has to be like the biggest mistake that I see every Destiny player do, and it's actually crazy how widespread this is, and that's going to be shooting bosses or mini bosses or anything that's tanky with a primary. If you guys don't know, special ammo weapons do like 10 times as much damage as primaries. It's actually crazy. And the bosses and mini bosses, champions, that kind of thing, they're all designed around being damaged by specials. They're not designed to be killed by primaries. You're going to have to sit there and dump mag after mag after mag into them with primaries. And that just takes forever. And in that time, they could be killing you. So if you're somebody who you know does this, you should definitely try to actively work on using special weapons against mini bosses and champions and that kind of thing, using your primary or your ad clear weapon against the ads, and of course your heavy against your bosses or your mini bosses whenever it's appropriate. This alone will not only speed up your gameplay, it will also help with your survivability because you won't be just sitting there getting nuked by mini bosses while you're trying to shoot it down with a weak weapon. And fourth on the list, this is going to be purely a gameplay decision, like the decisions that you're making when you're playing the game. We're going to be talking about that. So Destiny is a game where you go very in a lot of the time. You're very aggressive and you're very close to the ads often. However, this is obviously kind of dangerous if you don't have anything to heal you up or keep you alive, or if you do it for too long, eventually your health is going to deplete. So you need to be deciding when is the right time to be going in and killing things and helping keep your teammates alive, and when is the time to be hiding and taking it easy and getting your health back. Because if you're always doing one or the other, you're either not helping the team at all, or you are obviously getting yourself killed by being too aggressive without the proper healing. And obviously the harder the activities are, the less aggressive you can be, the more far away you have to be to stay safe and dodge enough shots to stay alive. If you do find yourself dying a lot, just think about how difficult the activity you're doing is and how aggressive you're playing. Maybe you should be taking it less aggressively if you already have a good build and have already met all the other things. And finally, I want to talk about mods. Mods on your armor. They are very important, and they are some of the biggest sources of survivability for any build. First up, we have the obvious. We have the elemental resistance mods on the chestplate, and you have the option between any of the 5 elements, and you also have the choices between melee, snipers, and splash. This is another one that I think that longer time players of the game are already pretty well aware of, but just in case you're not, pretty much every single dangerous attack in Destiny is splash. It's somehow splash. Even things like melee attacks tend to have splash attached to them, and the splash resistance affects that. So if you find yourself dying often and you're not using any resistance mods, I highly recommend using a concussive dampener for sure, and then obviously matching the elements for whatever you're doing. A lot of the time it's going to be arc. I notice a lot of the dangerous attacks are arc, stuff like hive boomers and wizard projectiles and that kind of thing, but you could also use obviously like void protection on Nezarec for his attacks, or Heffend in the Warlord's Ruin dungeon. So it really does just depend on the activity you're doing, which elements you should be doing. However, my general default, if I don't know what I'm going into, is going to be arc and concussive dampener. And on the topic of resistance, we also have to obviously look at resilience. Resilience is pretty much just the most important stat in the game when it comes to PvE at this point. There's no real ways to just get passive damage resistance other than having high resilience. So resilience is kind of something that's unreplaceable as an armor stat, whereas something like discipline could be replaced by having a good build that generates its own grenades. So if you are a newer player and you don't already have good armor, make sure that you are looking out for resilience and trying to get to 100 resilience as soon as possible. It is like 30% damage resistance, and it is definitely life-changing from not having any at all. Another great mod you can use in general gameplay, outside of doing DPS to a raid boss where you would obviously be using surges, is going to be both Better Already and recuperation on your boots. These are both mods which give you health every time you pick up an orb, and producing orbs is a very common thing in this game. There are orbs everywhere just all the time, so obviously getting health from that is huge. Recuperation basically just instantly gives you a chunk of health back every orb, and Better Already starts your health regen whenever you pick it up instead of giving you a chunk. So if you have like really good recovery, then I recommend using just recuperation, but if you have like really low recovery, then you might get some benefit out of using the Better Already mod instead. However, if you're already using restoration chaining or you're getting restoration often, I would just use recuperation for the health chunks, since having your health regen naturally doesn't really matter with restoration. And that's going to cover all of the main combat encounter mechanics, but I thought that as a little bonus I would also include some jumping puzzle help for those people who struggle with that. So first of all, even without any sort of good mechanical skill at the game, you could still get through jumping puzzles easier using a sword, especially with Eager Edge, but even without, swords still help because they can change your direction, and they let you have third-person view, which is better for seeing around things that you're standing on. While obviously well skating over the entire jumping puzzle is generally the easiest way to do it, if you're not able to well skate and you are having to actually participate, again I would still use the Eager Edge sword because it helps you just switch direction really quickly and also just jump longer distances easier. So it's definitely something that's worth learning. And there are a ton of movement guide videos out there regarding Eager Edge, and I highly recommend at least watching the part for the class that you play, especially so if you're on Warlock, because there are even more insane tricks on Warlock. Some other simple pointers that you should be aware of are things like mantle not working on moving platforms. So if the platform is moving, you will not be able to mantle to it. And lastly, you should make sure you have the best exotics or class setups on whatever class you're running. For example, if you're on Titan, obviously Lion Ramparts helps out a lot. You should be using Catapult Jump, not Strafe Jump on Titan. It is so much better. It makes you go faster in just lateral movement, but it also has more reliability for something like a jumping puzzle, even more so with Lion Rampant. It gives you a lot of height and a lot of distance, and it's definitely the best jump for Titan. As for Hunter, obviously you'll want to use triple jump with Stompies, and for Warlock, you can use pretty much any exotic. It's not that big of a deal, but you'll want to be on Solar for Icarus Dash. Or obviously on all 3 classes now, you can also use Grapple on the Strand subclass. So all great options for getting through jumping puzzles easier without having to have any real skills to get through them. So I highly recommend just trying out any of these if you struggle with any of the jumping puzzles. And that's going to do it for the video. Thank you so much for watching to the end. It means the world to me, and you should definitely leave a comment with your thoughts below. Also, if you send this to your friends because they die a lot, it would be absolutely hilarious to know about that. So definitely leave me a comment below. It's my absolute favorite thing to do is to get to read comments. I still get notifications on my phone every single time somebody sends a comment, so I will certainly read yours. Anyways, see you in the next one, and bye-bye.